December 30th, 2006, Camp Cropper Detention Facility, Baghdad. American guards entered Saddam Hussein's cell hours before dawn and told him calmly, "Today the sentence will be carried out." His hand did not tremble. His eyes did not flicker, as if he had been waiting for this day all along. At the moment when even the strongest men collapsed, he stood firm with a composure that stunned his executioners. He smiled quietly, performed his prayers, then asked for something strange, something no one expected: a coat. Not because he was cold, but because he refused to let the world think he was trembling from fear. So what did Saddam do during those final hours? Why did some of the Americans who guarded him break down when he died? And did he face death as he wished, or as they wanted him to? In the next 20 minutes, we'll go over his relationship with the night shift guards, the letters he wrote, and his last requests, and what witnesses saw in that execution chamber. The American soldiers assigned to guard Saddam at Camp Cropper called themselves the Super 12. These were young military police officers, most barely out of their teens, from small working-class towns across America. They joined the military after September 11, 2001, looking for purpose and adventure. When they arrived in Iraq in 2006, they were given an assignment unlike anything they had trained for: guard Saddam Hussein as he awaited sentencing. The soldiers were forbidden from keeping journals or discussing their work with anyone, even their families. All their emails were monitored. They were subject to random searches to ensure they weren't taking notes. The secrecy was absolute because their prisoner was the most famous detainee in the world. When they first met Saddam, most expected to encounter a monster. What they found would challenge everything they thought they knew. And what happened next was something none of them had anticipated. Private First Class Adam Rogerson later described his first encounter with Saddam. "You could hear him sleeping," Rogerson recalled. Once Saddam heard the guards come down, he got up to use the restroom. Rogerson couldn't believe he was standing there watching Saddam Hussein go about his morning routine in what felt like a surreal moment. At first, there was a lot of staring between them, an awkward silence where neither knew quite what to say. But over months of 8-hour shifts, often alone with Saddam in the detention area built inside one of his former palaces, something unexpected began to develop. Saddam was 69 years old by the time these soldiers were guarding him. He had been in American custody since his capture in December 2003, when US forces found him hiding in a spider hole near his hometown of Tikrit. 3 years in detention had transformed him from the defiant dictator in military uniform to an elderly man in simple clothes who spent his days reading, writing, and talking with his guard. The guards discovered that Saddam was curious about their lives, asking about their families, girlfriends, and hometowns. He wrote poems for them and told stories about meeting world leaders and smoking Cuban cigars. One guard later said he couldn't believe the stories Saddam told about his life before prison, conversations that were unlike anything most of these young soldiers from rural America had ever encountered. The guards brought him cigars, and he taught some of them to appreciate Cuban brands. They played chess together. They talked about books. Saddam loved to read, particularly Russian novels and Arabic literature. The guards even cleaned up a derelict room in the palace and converted it into an office where Saddam could write and read in peace. He spent hours there, conducting correspondence and filling diaries with his thoughts. Saddam adapted to his imprisonment with unexpected grace. He maintained routines that gave structure to his days. He exercised regularly, keeping himself physically active despite his age. He tended a small garden that the guards allowed him to plant near his cell, growing vegetables and caring for them with surprising dedication. The garden became something of a point of pride for him, a small patch of earth he could still control and nurture. Guards would find him in the courtyard, smoking his cigars and tending his plants, looking more like someone's grandfather than the dictator who had once terrified millions. The conversations between Saddam and his guards ranged widely. He asked the soldiers about American culture, genuinely curious about life in the small towns they came from, wanting to know about their families, their parents' occupations, their siblings, and their plans after leaving the military. The guards found themselves opening up to him in ways they hadn't expected, with one soldier later recalling how he told Saddam about relationship problems with his girlfriend back home, and Saddam offered advice, like a concerned older relative. Several guards later admitted they developed an attachment to their prisoner. Adam Rogerson reflected that being willing to lay down your life for somebody means you get attached. At 22 years old, that was heavy. Second Lieutenant Kelly Hillier from Kansas City described Saddam as having another side to him that you saw when they smoked cigars together. But this strange bond between prisoner and guards couldn't last forever. The legal process was moving forward and time was running out. When the appeals court rejected Saddam's final appeal on December 26, 2006, reality set in. Under Iraqi law, execution had to occur within 30 days. For the guards who had spent months with Saddam, the the news hit hard. The clock was now ticking. Somewhere in those next 30 days, Saddam Hussein would die. As it turned out, the wait wouldn't be long. On the night of December 29th, going into December 30th, Saddam spent his final hours going through routines he had maintained for months. According to multiple accounts from American guards who were present, he sat on the floor of his cell and performed ablution, the ritual washing before prayer that Muslims complete before each of the 5 daily prayers. The process involved washing his hands, rinsing his mouth and cleaning his nostrils, then washing his face, wiping his head, and washing his feet. He completed each step methodically, just as he had done thousands of times before. After ablution, he prayed, then began reading from his small personal copy of the Quran in the same corner where he had been sitting for months. The Quran was a gift from his wife, and he had kept it with him throughout his detention and trial. According to guards, he remained completely calm during these hours, showing no outward signs of distress or fear. His composure struck everyone who saw him that night. A young American guard named Rodriguez approached Saddam sometime during these final hours and offered him his final meal. The meal consisted of grilled chicken, a small portion of rice, some fruit, and a cup of water. Saddam did not reach for the food, only looking at the plate before accepting just the cup of water. An American doctor who was present asked if he wanted any sedative or an anesthetic to help calm his nerves or ease what was coming. Saddam refused firmly, telling the doctor he wanted to meet God with a present heart and a clear mind. By refusing any medication, Saddam would face his execution fully conscious and aware, experiencing every moment leading up to his death. After drinking the water, Saddam took a piece of bread from the plate, crumbled it gently with his hands, and walked toward the small window in his cell. According to testimonies from guards who were with him during this period, this routine was something Saddam had done regularly in his final days. It was a small gesture, but one that several guards found striking. One guard later said they didn't understand this man. Some saw him as a dictator responsible for terrible things, while others saw him as a symbol of resistance. But in those moments, watching him feed birds through a prison window, he appeared to them as a human being, different from everything they had been told about him. Now, you might be wondering why we're focusing so much on these humanizing moments, the cigars, the chess games, the bird feeding. It's not to excuse or forget what Saddam did during his rule. It's because understanding what happened in that execution chamber requires understanding the relationship between these guards and their prisoner. The confusion they felt, the attachment they developed despite everything they knew, that's what made the final hours so devastating for them. And it's what made Saddam's last request for that coat carry so much weight. As dawn approached on December 30th, those same guards who had shared cigars and conversations with Saddam now had to prepare him for his execution. Saddam returned to his corner after feeding the birds, sat on his worn prayer mat that had been with him throughout his detention, and performed the dawn prayer known as Fajr in Islam. This is the first of the 5 daily prayers and must be performed before sunrise. After finishing the prayer, he sat on the edge of his metal bed and continued reading the Quran, turning the pages slowly and deliberately. He then closed the Quran, placed it on his chest with both hands, and said something that guards remembered clearly. "This is my final companion." The statement reflected his understanding that these were his last hours and that the Quran would be with him until the end. As 4 o'clock in the morning approached, the American detention officer responsible for overseeing the transfer entered Saddam's cell and said, "Mr. President, it is time to leave." The use of the title Mr. President was notable. Despite everything, despite the conviction and the death sentence, some of the Americans still addressed him by his former title. Saddam looked at the officer with a calm smile and made 2 requests. He said he wanted his old coat and wanted to say goodbye to his brothers, Barzan and Sabawi, who were also being held at the facility awaiting their own executions for crimes they had committed during Saddam's regime. One of the guards was surprised by the coat request and asked why he wanted it. They were in a closed hall inside the detention facility, and the weather wasn't even cold in the building. It seemed like an odd thing to request at such a moment. Saddam replied with a faint smile, and his response became one of the most repeated details of his final hours. He said, "The air in Baghdad at dawn is cold, and I do not want my people to think I am trembling from fear." He wanted to ensure that if anyone saw him shivering, they would attribute it to the temperature rather than to terror at what was about to happen. This detail has become one of the most repeated and debated stories about Saddam's final hours. Whether the exchange happened exactly as reported, with those precise words, is difficult to verify with complete certainty. Guards who were present have told slightly different versions over the years, and memories can shift over time. But the core of the story, that Saddam requested a coat specifically to control how his final moments would be perceived, fits perfectly with the pattern everyone who saw him that morning described. A man obsessed with controlling the optics of his death. He understood better than perhaps anyone that he had lost everything else. His power was gone, his regime had collapsed, his sons were dead, his country was occupied, and his life was about to end. The only thing left that he could still influence was the performance of how he faced the end, and he was determined to get that performance exactly right. He put on his coat, buttoning it carefully, then turned toward the American guards who had accompanied him throughout the months of his detention and said, "You are all good young men. I want nothing from you. Do what you have been ordered to do." The statement was Saddam giving them permission, in a sense, to do their duty without guilt. One of the soldiers stepped forward and shook his hand, a gesture that surprised some of the other guards. After the handshake, Saddam's hands were bound in front of him with restraint. He then made one final request. He asked to take the Quran with him. The guards consulted with their superiors and decided to allow it on the condition that he would not be permitted to open it during transport for security reasons. The emotional impact on the young American soldiers who had guarded Saddam for months was profound and would stay with them for years. Several later described feeling devastated as they watched him being led away. Adam Rogerson, in interviews years later, said he felt like he had let Saddam down, as if he had failed to protect someone he had grown close to. He struggled to reconcile his duty as a soldier with the personal connection he had developed with the prisoner. Another guard said he felt like he should hate Saddam for all the things he had done, but found it wasn't easy to hate someone you had spent months getting to know as a person. These were young men, many barely out of their teens, who had spent countless hours in close quarters with an elderly prisoner who had been kind to them, interested in their lives, and treated them with a grandfatherly warmth that seemed impossible to square with the crimes he had been convicted of committing. Outside, a US military helicopter waited on the tarmac to transport Saddam to Camp Justice, the secure facility where Iraqi officials would carry out the execution. Saddam exited the cell through a long corridor lined with soldiers standing at attention. The walk from his cell to the vehicle felt surreal to everyone present. Some of the soldiers saluted him as he passed, a mark of respect that felt strange under the circumstances. Others could not bring themselves to meet his eyes, looking away or down at the ground as he walked by. Saddam walked with his head up, his posture straight despite his bound hands, maintaining the composure he had shown since being told that morning that this was the day. Boarded an American armored vehicle bearing Red Cross markings, then was transported by Black Hawk helicopter to Camp Justice in the Kadimir district of Baghdad, the site that had been designated for carrying out the sentence. The helicopter flight took approximately 15 to 20 minutes. During that short flight, according to accounts from personnel who were aboard, Saddam spoke only one sentence. He said, "Let me see Baghdad." The request was simple and direct. The guards looked at each other, then decided to allow it. They positioned him near a window, and Saddam cast one final glance at the city he had ruled for more than 2 decades, the city where he had risen to power and from which he had governed Iraq. What he thought as he looked down at Baghdad in those final moments, no one knows. He said nothing more during the flight. When the helicopter landed, he was transferred to an old military intelligence building that had been converted into a temporary prison. The gallows had been prepared. Saddam entered the execution chamber. The lighting was dim. At its center stood a wooden platform with a trap door, above which hung a thick noose. This was it. Everything that had led to this moment, the months in detention, the relationship with his guards, the careful performance of composure, all of it would end in this room. Waiting at the door was Iraq's national security advisor, who was astonished by Saddam's composure as he approached the gallows. He later said Saddam was bound at the hands and carrying the Quran. There were no signs of fear or collapse. He was not under the influence of sedatives or anesthetic and remained composed until the very end. A judge read the death sentence aloud. One of the guards asked Saddam whether he was afraid of dying. When the charges were read aloud again, Saddam shouted, "Death to America and to the Persians! Long live Palestine!" Saddam responded by saying, "Is this manhood? Is this the bravery of men? I fear no one. I have been a fighter all my life." The executioners produced a dark piece of cloth and approached Saddam with it. They explained they wanted to wrap it around his neck like a scarf before placing the noose. The cloth would protect his neck and make the hanging quicker. Saddam initially refused. After the executioner explained the purpose, Saddam allowed them to proceed. Some witnesses described Saddam as shivering and pale-faced at this point, looking as though he could not believe what was happening. One prosecutor who was present saw something different. He said Saddam was holding tight and was not scared. The executioners then offered Saddam a hood to cover his face. Saddam refused. This refusal mattered because it meant Saddam would die with his eyes open, visible to everyone in the room and to anyone who might later see footage of the execution. With the dark cloth wrapped around his neck and his hands cuffed in front of him, Saddam shuffled onto the gallows platform. The masked men guided him into position. He stood erect on the trap door, facing straight ahead as the noose was lowered over his neck and tightened around the cloth scarf. According to some accounts, Muqtada al-Sadr himself was present, standing to the right of the platform, wanting to see with his own eyes that the man to be executed was actually Saddam. The scene captured on the leaked mobile phone video showed exactly this chaos. Masked men shouting sectarian chants at a bound prisoner about to die. Those present began shouting at Saddam. One voice told him to go to hell. Saddam raised his head and replied calmly, "The hell that is Iraq." He then began reciting the Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith. "I bear witness that there is no God but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God." Before he could complete the second declaration, the metal trapdoor beneath his feet opened and he fell. According to official reports, the rope broke his neck instantly. A doctor confirmed death at approximately 6:03 in the morning. But what happened after the execution has become the subject of controversy. According to Saddam's lawyer, who quoted witnesses present at the execution, the scene was far more chaotic than official accounts suggested. He described what occurred as a mob-style revenge operation rather than a legal procedure. Iraq's national security advisor insisted that Saddam's body was treated with dignity. However, other accounts told different stories. Some witnesses claimed the scene became chaotic and disrespectful toward the body. One guard later made allegations about mistreatment after the execution, though tribal leaders disputed these claims. The American soldiers who had guarded Saddam watched from nearby. Rather than celebrating, several felt profound sadness and anger. One soldier became so upset at how the body was being treated that he tried to intervene, only to be held back by his colleagues. For these young Americans, the man whose remains were being shown disrespect was someone they had known personally. Within hours, a US military helicopter transported Saddam's body to Tikrit, where it was handed over to tribal leaders. The burial took place shortly before dawn on December 31st in Al-Awja, Saddam's birthplace. Dozens of relatives and mourners attended. Saddam was buried near his sons, who had been killed by American forces in 2003. According to some accounts, the grave was later moved to a secret location to prevent desecration, though this has never been confirmed. But while Saddam's body was being laid to rest, the execution itself was about to become far more public than Iraqi authorities had intended. The leaked mobile phone video began spreading across the internet within hours of the execution. The footage showed everything the official video had concealed: the sectarian chanting, Saddam's mocking response, the chaotic atmosphere, and the moment the trap door opened. The video transformed how the execution would be remembered. Instead of a dignified legal proceeding, the world saw what many interpreted as sectarian revenge. Iraqi authorities moved quickly to investigate who had leaked the video. Within days, they arrested a guard believed to have made the recording. The guard worked for Iraq's Justice Ministry, leading to speculation about whether the leak had been intentional. The question of what Saddam accomplished in those final 24 hours depends on perspective. Some witnesses insisted Saddam was not scared and that he held tight until the end, refusing the hood to keep his face visible, mocking his executioners while questioning their bravery, and dying while reciting prayers rather than begging for mercy. Other witnesses described a frightened man whose pale face and shivering revealed terror beneath the performance. The truth probably lies somewhere between these accounts. Saddam was almost certainly afraid, but he was determined not to show it. The jacket to avoid appearing cold, the refusal of the hood, the calm responses to his taunters. Whether these actions represented genuine courage or the final manipulation of a skilled politician, each person examining the evidence must decide for themselves. The American guards who spent months with Saddam processed their experiences privately for years. Some suffered from nightmares and post-traumatic stress. Several would wake up with a jolt during the night, expecting to see Saddam. One later reflected that he knew he should hate Saddam, but found it wasn't easy. These young soldiers had been given an impossible assignment: guard a man convicted of terrible crimes, get to know him as a person, then watch as he was executed. What remains clear from all accounts is that Saddam Hussein understood the power of symbols and how death is remembered. He couldn't control his fate. The sentence had been passed, the appeals had failed, and the execution was inevitable. But he could attempt to control how he faced that fate through the jacket request, the refusal of the hood, the mocking questions to his executioners, and the prayers as the trapdoor opened. Saddam Hussein died on December 30th, 2006 at 6:03 in the morning. His final word cut off mid-prayer as the rope broke his neck. The 24 hours leading up to that moment revealed a man who, stripped of everything else, still tried to control the narrative of his own death. He spent those final hours in prayer, feeding birds outside his window, saying goodbye to guards who had unexpectedly grown to care about him, and preparing himself to face the gallows without showing the fear that almost certainly consumed him. In the end, whether he died with genuine courage or simply put on one final performance, the manner of his death became as controversial and debated as the life that preceded it.